I want to get the lip service out of the way quickly on this one, if that's okay. We're talking about Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. It's the final game in the Danganronpa series, and the accrued experience of the previous two games is on full display. The production value is absolutely off the charts for a visual novel. Almost certainly the highest I've seen in the genre. This is evident in the runtime, which has been beefed up to RPG levels, the visual novel presentation, which now fully takes place in 3D space and even has light elements of genuine camera work, the breadth of added side content including minigame side modes and extra scenes, the visual flair on screen with class trial sequences that ooze with so much polish and charisma that they make the previous games look like rough prototypes in comparison. Even the soundtrack got a noticeable bump, now boasting over 100 tracks that had to be split across 2 discs. No matter how you slice it, if you're judging these games based on sheer gaming value per dollar, which to be clear, no one is, but if you were, Danganronpa V3 goes uncontested in not just the Danganronpa series, but in the visual novel genre as a whole. Its artistic achievements obviously don't stop at what money can buy. I personally have always loved this game's aggressive adherence to its color palettes. Pretty much no character design leans on bright, cheery colors, matching the game's tone well. When you put V3 characters next to the characters from the other games, they honestly look like they don't quite fit in. And I think that's to the game's benefit. Comparatively, the soundtrack doesn't diverge quite as much. It's probably a bit more polished overall than the others, but it's definitely still Danganronpa, just with a newfound emotional depth and thematic complexity. Again, to match the demands of where this game wants to take the player. Overall, I'd say most game elements end up supporting the game to that end. Pairing well with this being the, as of now, final game in the series, there's a gravitas to V3, a real sense on the part of the developers that they are giving their all to this project, and that they really have something to say. Danganronpa has never struggled to craft compelling characters, and those characters often lean pretty heavily somewhere on the spectrum between an endearing, eccentric personality and a more fully fleshed out thematic influencer. The cast of V3, more than any other cast, leans toward the latter. These games have always strived for an element of desperation and sadness, but V3 has a sniper-like focus on this idea that no previous game did. Pretty much every major conflict in this game resolves in a way that is either aggressively upsetting or aggressively disturbing, or sometimes both. As I touched on when I talked about the first game, I would hate this kind of storytelling if it was done purposelessly or just for shock value, but it is so meaningful. My goodness, is it filled with meaning. Danganronpa V3 does something that is one of my absolute favorite things a video game can do, and I've waited until now to talk about it because V3 does it better than any other video game I've played. Any old entertainment medium can get you to sympathize or empathize with a character, to feel bad for a character, or feel like you could relate to what they're going through. But with the creation of video games, interactive stories, storytellers can now make the audience literally experience the exact same thing. You no longer relate to the character's mentality, you are now actually sharing it. This is still super hard to do, for sure. It's pretty rare in the genre. You have to somehow get past the whole barrier of the player knowing that they're interacting with a fictional and digital space. But it can be done. Some examples of games I've already talked about that I feel like achieve this include Undertale and Yakuza 2. And for the record, I actually believe it's possible for movies and books and the like to achieve this as well. I think it's just a lot more common in video games due to the obvious interactive element. But back to V3, I think it's fair to say that the primary theme of the game centers around the relationship between truth and lies. As the player of a murder mystery detective game, we have an obvious perception that seeking the truth is the right thing to do. Yet, through the downer nature of this game, it feels like you are constantly beat down for achieving what is supposed to be a righteous pursuit. This allows the game to maintain that excellent heavy atmosphere and tone, as well as enhance the depth of many characters as they bob and weave around these themes. And as the game reveals its full hand to you, and the nature of these themes begins to be brought to fruition, the game brilliantly presents a dilemma that is, no exaggeration, nearly as relevant to the player playing the game as it is the characters in the game. The writers of this game put you, the player, in a situation where your ability to process and cope with the dilemma being presented to you is, in a way, roped into the challenge of this game. Not to suggest that you can't finish the game or anything, but it could result in you walking away from the game feeling confused, cheated, lost, or underwhelmed. Coincidentally, Danganronpa V3 has one of my top 2 favorite video game endings of all time. And also, it, and the other game in that top 2, are the 2 games I find myself explaining the themes of to the most people who feel confused. It's such a bespoke and interesting position for a story to be in. On the one hand, if someone doesn't like the story of V3, that is completely understandable and respectable, and there isn't anything wrong with that. Heck, if I played it at a different time in my life, I'd probably be right there with you. Yet, on the other hand, I do completely believe that the fact that people walk away from this game feeling angry or upset with it is inherently indicative that what I'm saying has merit, that the game is intentionally challenging people in ways not often experienced. I'll put it this way, if V3's story was presented differently in such a way that pretty much everyone walked away from it feeling content and satisfied, I think it would be impossible for it to deliver the same messages and ideas that it does. And hey, there's an argument to be made for making your media more universally appealing to as many audiences as possible. But there's obviously an argument for the opposite too. And in that hypothetical world where V3 doesn't push the player's buttons in the same way, doesn't go for these bold and innovative themes, it doesn't get nearly as high on my personal list of favorite games at the very least. Danganronpa V3 is one of my favorite games to think about, period. And it's such a nice bonus that it's one of my all-time favorite games with an anime art style to look at. That's another rare credit that it has. You can probably tell that I am utterly desperate to get into spoilers, but frankly, deep dives like that they're just not what this show is about. And fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on what kind of viewer you are, when we get into the top 10, I am allowed to get into spoilers, although I still think I'll refrain in most cases. And also, all of those segments will be on the longer side. That one's probably expected. I kinda can't believe that we're actually gonna make it.